It was 11:10 at night. My husband slapped me across the face because there was no dinner on the table. He shouted, "Get your behind in the kitchen and cook right now, woman!" I stayed silent and went into the kitchen for 20 minutes. When I came back with a covered silver tray, they thought it was a delicious meal. But when I lifted the lid, the contents were not food, but a one-way ticket to their own personal hell on earth. The wall clock in the living room marked 11:10 at night. Outside, the street was buried in deep silence. The only sound was the faint friction of my car tires on the asphalt of the driveway. My body felt crushed. I had spent the entire day at the office dealing with mountains of audit reports that had to be ready by the next morning. My head throbbed with a piercing pain, as if a hammer were hitting me over and over again. Still, I forced myself to sketch a light smile. I imagined the soft bed waiting for me in a few moments. I just wanted to take a hot shower and sleep without interruptions. I turned off the car engine and walked reluctantly toward the front door. The house keys jingled in my hand, which was trembling slightly from exhaustion. When I opened the door, a blast of cold air from the air conditioner hit me in the face. Strange. Normally at this hour, the living room lights were already off, but this time everything was illuminated with a bright light. Suddenly, I had a bad feeling. My steps stopped at the threshold when I saw 3 people sitting on the living room sofa with indecipherable looks. Marcus, my husband, sat in the center with his legs crossed arrogantly. To his right, Loretta, my mother-in-law, looked at me with sharp, accusing eyes, and to his left, Chantel, my sister-in-law, was playing with her phone, although every now and then she shot me a look with a cynical smile. Before I could say hello, Marcus jumped up and strode toward me. His face was red with rage and his jaw was clenched. I could see the veins in his neck popping out, a sign that he was about to explode. "Honey, I just got home." I hadn't finished the sentence when a hard slap landed on my left cheek. The sound was so crisp it broke the silence of the night in the living room. A stinging sensation and intense heat spread across my face instantly. My head turned to the side from the force of the blow. I stood paralyzed. The exhaustion I felt in my body seemed to vanish, replaced by overwhelming shock. My right hand trembled as I touched my cheek, which was starting to feel numb. I looked at Marcus, trying to find a shred of remorse in his eyes, but there was nothing, only the glint of explosive fury. "Have you seen what time it is, you cheap tramp?" Marcus screamed directly in my face. His spit even splattered onto my blouse. "Who do you think you are to come in at this hour? Out partying while your husband is at home?" I tried to hold back the tears fighting to come out. "Marcus, I've been working overtime. You know it's the end of the month. I have a ton of work. Besides, I sent you a text this afternoon," I replied with a trembling voice, but struggling to stay calm. I didn't want to look weak in front of them. "Excuses!" Loretta interrupted with a shrill voice. The woman got up from the sofa and pointed a finger in my face. "What kind of wife are you? We've been sitting here for an hour, starving. There is nothing on the table. The pots are empty. In the fridge there is only cold water. Do you want your husband and me to die of starvation?" "Hey," Chantel intervened without taking her eyes off her phone screen, as if I were less important than whatever she was seeing on her social media. "A little self-criticism, right? Keisha, Marcus is tired from being at home all day. The least a wife can do when coming home from work is bring food or cook, not come back empty-handed." Wow, how useless. I looked at them one by one. Marcus, unemployed for 6 months because he was fired for embezzling company funds, although he always told the neighbors he was starting his own business. Loretta, who asked me for thousands of dollars every month for her expenses and her meetings with friends, but was incapable of lifting a single dirty plate in this house. And Chantel, a 25-year-old girl whose only job was sleeping, eating, and online shopping with my additional credit card. All of them lived off my sweat. All of them breathed under the roof of a house whose mortgage I paid every month. And now they were yelling at me because I was late home to make them dinner. "Get to the kitchen at once, woman!" Marcus bellowed again, this time shoving me roughly by the shoulder until I stumbled and crashed into the shoe rack. "And don't come out of the kitchen until there is decent food on the table. And be careful, if it doesn't taste good, I'll smash the plate in your face." I took a deep breath, trying to stifle the rage starting to burn in my chest. I was dying to scream, to vomit all the frustration I had kept inside for so long. I was dying to kick them out of the house right then and there. But no, anger would only ruin my plan. I needed calm to pay them back in the most painful way possible, an elegant revenge they would never forget for the rest of their lives. I straightened up and fixed my clothes. I looked Marcus directly in the eyes. There was no longer fear or sadness in my gaze, only an empty coldness. "All right," I said in a low but firm voice. "I am going to prepare a special dish for you, the one you deserve most tonight." Without waiting for their reply, I walked past Marcus, ignoring Loretta's look of contempt and Chantel's mocking laugh. I walked straight toward the kitchen, the place where I normally spent hours serving them as if I were their maid. But tonight would be different. Tonight the aroma of delicious food would not come out of this kitchen. Tonight, this kitchen would become the place where I would prepare their ruin. Upon reaching the kitchen, I closed the door firmly. I leaned my back against it and closed my eyes for a moment to gather strength. The stinging on my cheek was still there, but the pain in my heart was much more unbearable. During our 5 years of marriage, I had always tried to be a devoted wife. I turned a blind eye to Marcus's laziness. I endured Loretta's criticism and gave in to Chantel's whims. I thought that with patience, they would change. How wrong I was. My patience had only fed the monsters inside them. They became greedier, crueler, and more brazen. I opened my eyes. The tears I had held back dried up. It wasn't worth crying for parasites like them. I went to a drawer in a corner of the kitchen where I kept the important things I had been hiding. It was enough. This family drama had to end this very night. The sound of a knife hitting a cutting board resonated loudly. Chop, chop, chop. The rhythm filled the kitchen, piercing through the walls until it reached the living room. I knew exactly what they were thinking out there. They were surely smiling with satisfaction, feeling victorious for having broken me once again. They must have thought the stupid, scared wife had started chopping onions or meat in a hurry to satisfy their spoiled stomachs. But on the kitchen counter, there wasn't a single ingredient. The big knife was just hitting the empty board over and over again. It was part of the show. I wanted them to feel on top of the world before throwing them into the deepest abyss. While I kept making that fake noise, my other hand was busy preparing the real dish. I took a large silver tray that we normally only used at Christmas or big family celebrations. The tray shone under the kitchen light. On it, I did not place plates with rice or stews. There was no pot roast, no chicken soup, no stir-fried vegetables, which was what they usually demanded. Instead, I took a thick folder out of a secret drawer under the sink, a folder I had been preparing for 3 months, waiting for the right moment to bring it to light. I opened it and took out 3 key documents. First, the property deed to this house. Back in the day, the house was bought with my savings. However, Marcus forced me to put his name on it too, so he would feel valued as the head of the household. But last month, after paying the final mortgage installment with my annual bonus, I secretly took care of changing the title so it would be solely in my name. The process was complicated and expensive, but luckily I had a trusted lawyer acquaintance who worked fast and without Marcus finding out. This document was proof that every brick, every tile, and every inch of land on this property belonged to me. Second, the divorce papers. The paper was already complete with my signature above the corresponding line. It detailed all the grounds for divorce: verbal abuse, physical abuse, the one that had just happened and which, luckily, had been recorded by the security camera I installed last week in the living room, and financial abandonment. I was sick of supporting a man whose only talent was giving orders. Third, a stack of bank statements as thick as a notebook. I had marked with a highlighter pen each of the transfers that had gone out of my account to fund their lifestyle. Marcus's car payment, the monthly money for Loretta's expenses that she used for her high society teas, Chantel's credit card bills for buying designer bags and shoes, and even the money for Marcus's cigarettes and gas. Everything was meticulously recorded. The sum was astronomical, enough to buy a small apartment in the suburbs. This was the irrefutable proof that I was the economic pillar of this family, wasn't I, Marcus? I placed the 3 documents carefully on the tray, the deed in the center, the divorce papers on the left, and the bank statements on the right. Then I covered it all with a shiny silver dome. Perfect! From the outside, it looked like a luxury dinner from a 5-star restaurant. I looked at my watch. Exactly 20 minutes had passed. It was time for the main event. I lifted the tray with both hands. It didn't weigh as much as the burden I had carried all these years. However, I felt it was the most beautiful load I had ever carried. I took a deep breath, put on an impassive face, and pushed the kitchen door open. In the dining room, the 3 of them were already sitting around the table. Their faces reflected impatience, knife and fork in hand, ready to devour whatever I had prepared for them. Upon seeing me come out with the large covered tray, Loretta's eyes shone. "That's how I like it," she said with disdain as she settled into her chair. "A wife has to be diligent. It's not enough to earn money. The stomachs of the husband and mother-in-law come first." Marcus huffed, his face still sour from the rage earlier. "You took an eternity. I hope the food is worth it. If it's bland, get ready to cook again." Chantel even craned her neck. "What's inside, sis? It's weird that it doesn't smell like anything from here. You didn't just make pasta, did you?" I didn't answer a single word. I placed the tray right in the center of the table with a slow, solemn movement. The sound of the tray touching the glass of the table silenced them for a moment. I stood at the head of the table, looking at them one by one with an expression that made Marcus frown. Perhaps he noticed the drastic change in my aura. "Go ahead," I said briefly. "This is the best dish I can offer you tonight. Eat until you are full." Impatient, Marcus reached out and lifted the silver dome abruptly. "Let's see what is." His sentence was left hanging. The sound of the dome being deposited on the table resonated loudly in the middle of a sudden, tense silence. There was no hot steam, no aroma of spices to whet the appetite. On the tray, there was only a stack of papers. Marcus's eyes widened like saucers as he looked at them. He squinted, trying to read what was on the top document. His face, which was previously red with anger, now turned pale little by little as he recognized the letterhead and the title of the document. "What the hell is this?" His voice trembled, not from anger, but from confusion and rising panic. Loretta, who was far-sighted, picked up the thickest bundle of papers. "Where is the food? Why are you giving us newspapers? Have you gone crazy, Keisha?" But when she saw the figures highlighted on the bank statements, her eyes widened. What is this?" Chantel, faster, grabbed the divorce papers directly, read them over quickly, and then looked at me with her mouth open. "Marcus, Keisha wants a divorce!" she shrieked hysterically. The situation exploded immediately. Marcus slammed the house deed against the table. He stood up, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Divorce papers? Who do you think you are to divorce me, you ungrateful wife? And this deed, why does only your name appear? Where is mine? You tricked me!" I smiled. A very sweet smile, but one that felt cold and piercing. "Eat reality, Marcus, Loretta, Chantel. Fill yourselves up looking at those numbers. That is the amount of my money you have eaten all this time," I said, looking Marcus directly in the eyes. "This house is legally mine. The original deed is already safely in a bank deposit box since this morning. That is just a photocopy, so tearing it up is useless." Then I turned to Loretta, who was starting to tremble while holding the bank statements. "And in this very instant, I am kicking you all out of my house." "With what right do you kick us out?" Loretta shouted. Her voice was so high-pitched my ears rang. "This is my son's house. Marcus is the head of the household here. You are just a guest." "Head of the household?" I laughed softly, a laugh that sounded bitter. What head of the household supports his family with his wife's money? What head of the household allows his mother to insult his own wife? For your information, Loretta, Marcus hasn't contributed a single cent to this house for a year. Even the electricity lighting the lamp above your head right now is paid for by me." Marcus growled with clenched fists, ready to hit me again. He started to circle the table, approaching me with the clear intention of hurting me. "You witch! Take back what you said, or I'm going to—" "You're going to what?" I challenged him. I didn't step back. On the contrary, I lifted my chin, daring him. "You want to hit me again? Go ahead. The security camera in that corner already recorded your slap earlier in the living room. Just one more touch and the recording will be sent automatically to the cloud and to my lawyer's phone. In addition to the divorce suit, do you want to add a criminal charge for domestic violence?" Marcus's step stopped dead. He looked up and saw the small camera with a blinking red light in the corner of the room. His face transformed into a mixture of fear and deep hatred. He realized he had fallen into my trap. "Get out," I said coldly. "Now." The silence my threat had created lasted only a few seconds before shattering into 1,000 pieces, turning into a deafening uproar. Loretta was the first to lose control. The old woman, who normally cared so much about her image as an elegant lady in front of her friends, was now howling like a woman possessed. She swept all the papers off the table with her wrinkled hands, scattering them across the floor. Her face was soaked in tears of rage, not sadness. She felt her pride trampled by the daughter-in-law she had always considered little more than a walking ATM. She didn't accept the reality that the luxury she enjoyed was going to disappear in an instant. Loretta pounded the dining table with her palms over and over again. Her voice sounded hoarse as she screamed accusations at me, calling me a scammer. She claimed I had manipulated Marcus, used black magic, or tricked her son in a moment of weakness to seize his assets. Her accusations seemed ridiculous to me. How was I going to trick Marcus to take his wealth if he had nothing? Everything in this house, from the silverware to the car in the garage, had been bought with the sweat of my brow. But logic didn't seem to apply to those panicking about losing their source of livelihood. Marcus, who had been paralyzed by the threat of the camera, now paced back and forth in the dining room like a caged beast. He pulled his hair in frustration. His bulging eyes looked for an escape, a way to turn the situation around. He picked up the photocopy of the house deed from the floor, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it at me. The hit was soft. It barely bounced off my shoulder, but it showed how powerless he felt. He knew he had no legal basis to object. The documents were authentic, the bank statements were real, and he knew perfectly well that he had lived off my money all this time. Chantel, my spoiled sister-in-law, reacted in a different way, but just as irritating. She didn't scream or get furious, but burst into hysterical tears while hugging the designer purse she had bought the week before. Of course, with my credit card, she begged her brother to do something. She was afraid of ending up on the street, of not being able to show off on social media anymore, of her friends discovering that she wasn't actually rich. Her pitiful crying gave me more of a headache, but at the same time produced a strange satisfaction. Finally, that girl felt fear for the future, that same fear that had tormented me every time I saw her credit card bills. I let them vent for a few minutes. I remained motionless at the end of the table with my arms crossed, enjoying the spectacle of the destruction of a family of parasites. When I considered it was enough, I walked to a corner of the room where I had hidden something behind the long curtains. I pulled out 3 large black garbage bags, the biggest ones, filled to the bursting point. I dragged them to the center of the room. The sound of plastic brushing against the tiled floor made them turn around. With all my strength, I threw the bags at them one by one. Thump, thump, thump. The 3 enormous bags landed at their feet. Marcus jumped, surprised. Loretta stopped howling, and Chantel paused her crying for a moment. They looked at the garbage bags with bewilderment. A faint smell of mothballs escaped from them, mixed with a dusty scent. "Those are your things," I said in a flat tone, devoid of emotion. "I gathered them this afternoon while you were out shopping. Clothes, pants, shoes, and your personal items that I considered important are inside. The rest, what seemed like trash to me, or things I bought with my money, but you don't deserve to take, I threw in the dumpster or kept to sell. Don't bother going up to your rooms. They are already locked, and I threw away the keys. You don't have access to any other part of this house except this dining room and the exit door."
Chantel screamed hysterically and ripped open one of the plastic bags. The contents spilled onto the floor. Wrinkled clothes rolled up in any which way, several pairs of shoes piled without their boxes, and cosmetics thrown in without a bag. She cried even harder seeing her collection of expensive clothes treated like garbage. She protested, saying her clothes would get ruined folded like that, but I didn't care. To me, they were simply junk that had to be out of my house as soon as possible. Loretta looked at me with disbelief, as if I had just turned into a monster. She brought her hand to her chest, pretending she was having a heart attack. She began to breathe with difficulty, hoping I would soften and cancel the eviction. Before, that trick always worked. Every time I got angry, she pretended to be sick, and I ended up apologizing and taking care of her. But this time, I just looked at her coldly. I knew the results of her last medical checkup from last month. Her heart was perfectly healthy. The only thing sick was her soul, full of envy and resentment. Marcus tried to approach again, this time with a pleading and fake tone. He lowered his voice and tried to touch my hand, but I pulled it away abruptly. He started talking about our good memories, the vows we made, what the neighbors would say if we divorced. He was trying to manipulate my feelings using his old weapons, pity and the fear of gossip. But he forgot that the heart of a repeatedly wounded woman eventually freezes and becomes as hard as a rock. There was no longer any crack through which Marcus could enter. I looked at my watch. 5 minutes had passed since my ultimatum. I took my phone out of my dress pocket, typed a couple of times, and showed them the screen displaying the emergency call button to the gated community's security booth. I looked at Marcus steadily, giving him a final, non-negotiable warning. My patience had run out, and I didn't want to waste any more time with this cheap drama. "Now take those garbage bags and drag them out of my house," I ordered firmly. "If you are still here in 10 seconds, I will press this button. The community security guards will come and remove you by force. Imagine the shame of being dragged out like thieves in front of all the neighbors. The choice is yours. Do you walk out on your own feet with the little dignity you have left, or do you leave by force with a free show for the whole neighborhood? 1, 2, 3. Marcus stood paralyzed. His face was pale as paper. He looked at me, searching for some doubt in my eyes, but found none. He saw deadly seriousness. With trembling hands, he grabbed one of the large plastic bags. He yelled at Chantel to stop crying and help him carry the things. He also pulled his mother's hand, who was still faking an asthma attack, to get her up. Finally, they realized I wasn't joking. The queen of the house had awakened, and her orders were absolute. The front door of the house opened wide, revealing the dense darkness of the night. A strong wind slipped inside, bringing with it the first drops of rain that began to fall heavily. The sky seemed to bless my plan to clean the house of all filth, because a storm broke out just as they took their first step outside. The sound of thunder rumbled in the distance, in time with the beating of my heart, accelerated by adrenaline. I stayed on the threshold, making sure they left with their garbage bags full of their meager belongings. Marcus went in front, carrying a large black plastic bag on his shoulder. He looked pathetic, very far from the image of the arrogant husband who had slapped me earlier. His shirt was soaked by rain splatters, his hair flattened and his face down, hiding his rage and shame. Behind him, Chantel dragged her bag reluctantly, cursing under her breath every time the plastic snagged on the driveway pavers. Loretta walked with difficulty, carrying nothing, trying to maintain the last vestiges of her pride with her chin held high, although her body was starting to shiver from the cold night wind. As soon as Loretta's last foot crossed the threshold, I slammed the heavy oak door shut. Boom! The crash became the final period of a dark chapter in my life. I threw the deadbolt and put on the security chain. Loud knocks were heard from outside. Seconds later, Marcus started shouting my name, insulting me, and then begging me. His voice sounded muffled, drowned out by the sound of the rain, which beat with more force against the roof. I didn't flinch. I went to the front window and moved the curtain slightly to spy. In the yard, the three of them were standing, shivering from the cold.
The rain was now pouring down, soaking them in seconds. The garbage bags were dripping, looking even more miserable. Marcus kept banging on the door, hoping I would soften seeing his state, but he was wrong. Seeing them soaked actually soothed the wounds in my heart. It was instant karma they were reaping for the treatment they had given me for years. Didn't they often leave me out in the rain waiting for a taxi after work, while Marcus used my car to go out with his friends? Now let them feel the cold water soaking into their bones. The commotion on my porch attracted the attention of the neighbors. The lights of the houses on both sides began to turn on. Some opened windows or came out onto their porches to see what was happening. Marcus, realizing he had an audience, changed tactics instantly. He stopped insulting and started shouting in a pitiful tone, trying to play the victim. He shouted to the neighbors that I was a heartless wife who had thrown her husband and sick mother-in-law out in the middle of the night. He acted as if he were the aggrieved one, hoping people's sympathy would force me to open the door. "Help! Help us! My wife has gone crazy! My mother has heart problems! Please, don't let us die out here!" Marcus screamed, pointing at the house door. Loretta, whose instinct for drama was very sharp, let herself fall onto the wet porch floor, pretending to faint. Chantel knelt beside her, shaking her mother's body while crying loudly, creating a soap opera scene. Some neighbors started whispering. The Homeowners Association president, who lived 3 houses down from mine, was approaching with an umbrella. I knew I couldn't stand by and let Marcus twist the facts. I grabbed my phone and called the main security gate. The phone rang twice before the deep voice of Mr. Henderson, the head of security for the community, answered. I asked him to come to my house immediately with his team because there was a public disturbance. I explained that there were some strange people causing a scene on my porch and disturbing the peace of the community. Shortly after, 2 security cars appeared with blue lights flashing. Henderson and 2 of his men got out quickly. They approached the porch where Marcus's family drama was unfolding. I gathered my courage and opened the door a crack, just enough to speak to Henderson without Marcus being able to enter. "Mr. Henderson, please take these people away," I said loudly. My voice cut through the sound of the rain so the spying neighbors could hear me. "They no longer live in this house. We have separated, and the house is my property, as stated in the deed. They are trying to enter by force and causing a scandal that bothers the neighbors. Please remove them from the community." Marcus was left open-mouthed. He tried to defend himself to Henderson. "Sir, this is my house. My wife is upset. Please don't listen to her." But Henderson was a professional guard who had been working here a long time. He knew perfectly well who paid the HOA and security fees punctually every month. Me, not Marcus. He had also seen Marcus come in drunk often, or bring his friends for noisy parties that the neighbors complained about. Henderson's sympathy was clearly not with Marcus. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer. Mrs. Keisha is the legal owner of this house and has asked you to leave. Please, don't cause any more trouble at this hour," Henderson said firmly while holding Marcus by the arm. "We're going to escort you to the exit." Marcus tried to resist, but the strength of the 2 burly guards was much greater. Loretta, who was pretending to be fainted, recovered suddenly and stood up for fear of being lifted by force. They escorted them out of the yard as if they were detainees. Marcus's face was red with shame for being the center of attention of the neighbors, who now looked at him with disdain. His theater of the aggrieved husband had failed miserably. When they reached the gate, Marcus suddenly remembered something. He stopped and turned, shouting at me, who was still in the doorway. "The car keys! Where are the car keys? My wallet and the car keys are still inside. Throw me the keys. At least let us go in the car." I smiled sideways and shook my head slowly. I took a step forward so he could see my face clearly under the porch light. "The car? What car, Marcus? The black SUV?" I asked with a fake innocent tone. "For your information, the papers for that car are in my name. I finished paying for it last month with my bonus, so it is my car. And I have hidden the keys in a place you will never find. You don't have the slightest right to that vehicle." But I need a vehicle. Where are we going to go in this rain?" Marcus shouted, frustrated. His voice broke in the middle of the downpour. "That is no longer my business," I replied coldly. "You can walk. A little exercise since you haven't moved much lately, or order a taxi." "Oh, wait." I forgot your wallet is inside, and all the credit cards in that wallet are authorized user cards linked to mine. And I blocked them 5 minutes ago from the app, so it's useless for you to have it." Marcus stood in silence with a face pale as a ghost. He had just realized the magnitude of his ruin that night. No house, no car, not a single cent. Henderson signaled his men to continue escorting them. "Come on, sir, let's keep walking. Don't bother Mrs. Keisha anymore," the guard warned him. Marcus, Loretta, and Chantel finally surrendered and were dragged away from the luxurious house where they had lived as parasites. They walked with difficulty under the torrential rain, dragging the black garbage bags that were now their only possession. I closed the door again and locked it. The rain kept falling heavily outside, but in here, in my house, the atmosphere was peaceful and warm. For the first time in 5 years, I felt that I had truly returned home. I felt I had lifted a huge weight off my shoulders. I leaned my back against the door, let out a long sigh, and smiled. That night, I was going to sleep deeply, very deeply. The gate of the luxurious gated community closed behind them, like a wall separating the comfortable life they had just left behind and the earthly hell that now welcomed them. The rain did not let up. On the contrary, it intensified with a freezing wind that soaked to the bone. Marcus, Loretta, and Chantel shivered on the edge of a lonely road. There was no roof to shelter under, except some leafy trees that actually let even more water fall. The three of them looked like drowned rats swept away by the current, wet, dirty, and miserable. The black garbage bags, which constituted their only fortune, felt heavier and heavier as they filled with water through the poorly tied knots. They walked aimlessly along the flooded sidewalk. The dim light of the street lamps illuminated their desperate faces. Marcus put his hand in his pants pocket for the umpteenth time, hoping for a miracle in the form of a forgotten bill or a lost debit card. But nothing. The pocket was empty. His expensive leather wallet with his driver's license, bank cards, and credit cards had stayed on the nightstand. Keisha had calculated everything perfectly. Without that wallet, Marcus was nobody. He couldn't rent a hotel room, nor buy food, nor even drink a hot tea in a bar. His identity and his access to money were locked in the house that was now forbidden to him. Loretta began to delirious from the cold. Her teeth chattered and her lips turned blue. The woman who had always looked impeccable with her makeup now seemed old and fragile. The rain had washed away the remains of her makeup, giving her a creepy look with black stains under her eyes. She blamed Marcus with a hoarse voice that was lost among the sound of the rain. She cursed her son's stupidity for not knowing how to control his wife. According to Loretta's twisted logic, all this was happening because Marcus hadn't been tough enough educating Keisha, not because they had oppressed her for years. Chantel walked behind, stumbling. The heel of one of her stilettos had snapped when she fell into a hole in the sidewalk, forcing her to limp while carrying the expensive shoe that was now useless in her hand. Finally, they found a small supermarket that was closed, with an overhang wide enough to take shelter. Without saying a word, they let themselves fall, exhausted, onto the cold and dusty tiled floor. Marcus leaned his back against the cold metal shutters. His stomach roared loudly. Hunger was beginning to attack with brutality. The last time they had eaten was at noon, and tonight they expected the feast Keisha was going to prepare for them. Ironically, they had received an unforgettable dish, even if it wasn't edible. The image of a plate of hot food danced now in his mind, torturing him slowly. Chantel took out her phone with the screen slightly cracked from a hit while dragging the garbage bag. She tried to order a taxi/Uber with the 10% battery she had left. However, her fingers stopped when she realized the payment method in the app was linked directly to Keisha's additional credit card. With trembling hands, she tried to make the booking, and indeed, a transaction failed notification appeared. Keisha had blocked everything. Chantel tried to call her high society friends, hoping one would help her. The first call wasn't answered. The second was rejected. The third was answered by a friend, Sarah. But as soon as Chantel told her she had been kicked out and needed money, Sarah used the excuse of bad reception and hung up. Chantel smashed the phone against the ground in frustration and burst into tears, hugging her knees. That night felt terribly long and torturous. They couldn't sleep a wink. Mosquitoes began to bite their damp skin. The occasional noise of passing cars startled them. Every time a luxury car passed, Marcus's heart ached, remembering his black SUV, now comfortably parked in Keisha's garage. In the silence of the early morning, Loretta complained of a sharp pain in her stomach from the cold and hunger. There was no medicine, no blankets, no hot water. Marcus could only look at his mother with empty eyes. A feeling of guilt began to surface, but his enormous ego pushed it away quickly, replacing it again with hatred toward Keisha. He swore he would get revenge as soon as the sun rose. Finally, dawn broke. The sunlight was dazzling, but it didn't warm their hearts. Their bodies were stiff and sore. A smell of dampness emanated from their clothes, which had dried on their bodies. People passing by looked at them with disgust, thinking they were the new vagrants in the area. An employee who arrived to open the store kicked them out roughly, throwing a bucket of water at their feet to make them leave. With shattered dignity, they dragged their things to a bench in a nearby park while they sat enduring a hunger that was becoming increasingly atrocious. Chantel, out of boredom, opened her social media with the few data she had left. Her eyes widened seeing Keisha's latest Instagram story, posted only 15 minutes ago. Chantel showed the screen to Marcus and Loretta. In it, you could see a photo of a bowl of fresh fruit and a steaming cup of artisan coffee with the background of a clean and modern apartment. In a corner of the photo, a small phrase, "The best breakfast is a breakfast without parasites, grateful for blessings." Seeing the photo, Marcus's stomach turned violently, not only from hunger, but from the envy and rage that exploded in his chest. Keisha was enjoying life while they suffered in the street like trash. The reality, without his wife's wallet, was terrifying. The world was no longer kind, and they were just worthless specks of dust. Marcus decided he couldn't give up. He still had a job. Yes, he was still the marketing director at an office supply distributor. Although his position wasn't very important and his salary was mediocre, he often spent it on small online bets he hid from Keisha. He thought that if he got to the office, he could ask for an advance or a loan from a colleague to rent a temporary room for his mother and sister. He had to save what was left of his dignity as a man. He left Loretta and Chantel in the park, promising to return with money and food at lunchtime. With pure determination, he walked the 2 miles to his office. He stopped in the bathrooms of a gas station to wash his face and fix his hair. Although he couldn't remove the stale smell from his wrinkled shirt, he cleaned his mud-covered shoes as best he could with a wet paper towel. His appearance was far from that of a manager, but he had no other choice. Upon reaching the lobby of the office, the receptionist looked at him with a furrowed brow. Normally, Marcus arrived with impeccable clothes, smelling of expensive cologne, and with an elegant air thanks to Keisha's care. Today he looked like someone who had just survived a disaster. Marcus ignored the strange look and went directly to the elevator. Inside, 2 employees from another department covered their noses discreetly and whispered while looking at him sideways. Marcus pretended not to see them, staring ahead with a tense face. His heart beat loudly, fearing his sudden poverty would be discovered. As soon as he arrived at his desk, before he could sit down, an employee from Human Resources was already there with a serious face. "Mr. Mercer, the CEO and the head of HR are waiting for you in the conference room right now," said the employee without smiling. Marcus had a bad feeling. Such a sudden summons was usually not a good sign. With a tired step, he followed the employee to the meeting room at the end of the hall. Inside, the CEO and the HR director were waiting, seated with a pile of documents on the table. Their faces were cold, with no trace of kindness. Marcus sat in the chair they indicated, trying to smile even though his lips were trembling. "What's happening? It's weird that you call me so early," he asked, trying to seem unconcerned. The director threw a blue folder at him. "Let's not beat around the bush. We have been conducting an internal audit for a week, and we have found many irregularities in the expense reports of the marketing team you manage." Marcus's heart seemed to stop. He opened the folder with sweaty hands. Inside was proof of embezzlement of operating funds, falsification of gas receipts, and even inflated bills for meals with clients that never existed. For a long time, Marcus had been taking small amounts of money from the company to maintain his lifestyle or pay his gambling debts. Before, every time there was a discrepancy in the cash, Keisha, who worked as an auditor in a prestigious firm that happened to be the external consultant for this company, often helped him fix the reports or even covered the losses with her own money to save Marcus's career. Keisha did it to protect her husband's reputation, but now that protective shield had disappeared. Clearly, Keisha was no longer covering Marcus's dirty laundry. In fact, perhaps it was she who gave the tip to the internal auditors to review Marcus's department in more detail. I can explain, sir. It's just a clerical error," Marcus stammered, seized by panic. Cold sweat ran down his temples. "A clerical error?" huffed the HR director. $50,000 have disappeared in 6 months and you call it a clerical error? We have already checked the restaurants and gas stations you attached. All these receipts are fake. And what is worse, we have received information that you have been using company resources for personal purposes." "Mr. Mercer," interrupted the director with a thunderous and firm voice, "the company cannot tolerate this type of criminal activity. As of this moment, you are fired for cause. You will not receive a single cent of severance, since the losses you have caused the company are greater than your rights. And one more thing, if you do not return the $50,000 in the next 48 hours, we will take this matter to court. The police will come looking for you." Marcus's world collapsed. Fired, no compensation, threatened with jail. He slumped in his chair without strength. He opened his mouth, but no voice came out. It was over. The only livelihood he had left had just been cut off. He tried to beg, even knelt at his director's feet, crying and screaming, forgetting all his dignity. But the decision was firm. They called 2 security guards to remove him from the building. The scene of the expulsion from the previous night repeated itself, this time at his workplace. Marcus was escorted between the desks of his colleagues, who looked at him with surprise and contempt. Whispers were heard everywhere. The news of his corruption spread like wildfire. They forced him to collect his personal items in a cardboard box from Instant Noodles. There wasn't much of value on his desk, only a photo of himself posing with an air of success. When Marcus left the lobby of the office building with the box in his hands, he saw something that tightened his chest until he was breathless. A luxurious silver sedan stopped right in front of the VIP entrance of the building next door, a much more prestigious business center. The car door opened, and out stepped a woman he knew very well. It was Keisha. But this Keisha was very different. She wore an elegant, modern-cut suit. Her hair was styled to perfection, her dark skin glowing radiantly, and she wore sunglasses that gave her a very sophisticated air. She walked with confidence, accompanied by 2 assistants carrying her briefcase. Keisha was heading to a meeting with an important client. Her career was in full swing. Marcus wanted to shout her name, run after her, but his feet seemed nailed to the ground. He saw his own reflection in the building's glass, disheveled, dirty, smelly, holding a cardboard box. Meanwhile, Keisha shone like a freshly cleaned diamond. At that moment, Keisha turned her head and looked at him fleetingly. Behind the sunglasses, Marcus could feel a sharp and piercing gaze. Keisha didn't stop, didn't greet him, didn't even show surprise. She simply looked away and continued her path toward the skyscraper, leaving Marcus paralyzed on the sidewalk, turned into a true loser. The ruin of his career was the perfect complement to his suffering, while the woman he had despised now flew high, unreachable. Marcus returned to the park with heavy steps, as if he wore 1-ton shackles on his ankles. The midday sun burned strongly, scorching the back of his neck. In his hands, he hugged the cardboard box with his office belongings, a symbol of his failure. During the journey, his stomach kept roaring, twisting with hunger. But hunger was nothing compared to the fear now gripping him. He had to face his mother and sister with empty hands, without money, without food, and worst of all, with the news that he was now unemployed with a criminal record at his company. Upon reaching the park, he encountered a desolate scene. Loretta and Chantel were curled up on a bench with peeling paint. They looked like plants pulled up by the roots. Loretta was massaging her swollen feet, while Chantel fanned herself with a piece of cardboard, her face full of annoyance. When they saw Marcus in the distance, their faces lit up for an instant. The hope of a sandwich and fresh water shone in their eyes. Chantel even jumped up, ignoring the pain in her foot, to receive her brother with an outstretched hand. But that hope shattered when Marcus arrived and dropped the box to the ground with a dull and desolate thud. He didn't dare look them in the eyes. He lowered his head, fixing his gaze on his leather shoes, once shiny and now covered in dust. With a broken voice, Marcus told them everything. His firing, the audit that uncovered his fraud, the threat of jail, and the fact that he wouldn't receive a single cent of severance. A dense silence enveloped them in contrast to the bustle of street traffic. And then the crying and fury erupted. Loretta screamed hysterically, not caring about the people passing by. She hit Marcus's arm with the little strength she had left, blaming her favorite son for being so clumsy and stupid. She lamented her fate, having to live on the street in her old age, comparing her life with that of her friends, who were surely napping in their air-conditioned rooms. The insults came out of Loretta's mouth without a filter. The same harsh words she used to dedicate to Keisha were now vomited onto Marcus. Chantel was no less cruel. She kicked Marcus's box, scattering its contents. She insulted her brother, calling him useless, someone who only knew how to cause problems. In that extreme situation, the mask of a united family they had always shown to Keisha crumbled completely. There was no longer love or mutual support, only the survival instinct of selfish individuals. They blamed each other for their sudden poverty. Chantel blamed Marcus for his corruption. Marcus blamed Chantel and Loretta for their wasteful lifestyle that forced him to steal. And Loretta blamed both of them for not having found rich partners who could support them. When the exhausting argument calmed down because they ran out of energy and were hungrier, Marcus made a desperate decision. He took off the designer watch from his wrist, the only item of value he had left since he was wearing it when Keisha kicked him out. He also demanded Chantel's gold earrings. Although Chantel resisted and screamed, Marcus and Loretta forced her with the excuse that they needed the money to eat and rent a cheap room. Finally, with a face full of resentment, Chantel handed over her earrings. Marcus went to a pawn shop or second-hand market, selling the watch and earrings to a street buyer. Without papers and with the urgency to get quick cash, they bought them for a laughable price, well below their real value. Marcus had no choice but to accept the cash, which was only enough to eat modestly for a few days and rent a tiny room in a bad neighborhood for a week. That afternoon, they rented a room by the day in a narrow, muddy, and smelly alley. The room was tiny. A thin, sagging foam mattress barely fit. The walls were damp and full of mold, without windows, only a small ventilation grate above the door. The bathroom was outside and shared with the other tenants who looked at them with suspicion. For Loretta and Chantel, accustomed to Keisha's luxurious and clean house, this place was hell. Loretta complained endlessly about the smell of dampness, the cockroaches, the suffocating heat with only a small dusty fan. That night, they ate takeout from a cheap diner. The atmosphere was somber, without conversation. They ate greedily, devoured by hunger, but their faces reflected the hatred they felt for one another. After dinner, Marcus put the little money he had left under his pillow with the intention of using it the next day to look for some odd job. Physical and mental exhaustion made Marcus and Loretta fall asleep quickly, snoring loudly on the thin mattress. But Chantel didn't sleep. Her eyes stared fixedly at the ceiling full of cobwebs. Her mind was a whirlwind. She looked with disgust at her mother and brother, asleep with their mouths open. She felt she didn't deserve to be in that miserable place. She was young, pretty, and believed she deserved a better life. She hated Marcus for having failed as a provider and felt burdened by having to take care of her mother, whose health was worsening from stress. Whispers of temptation began to taunt her. If she stayed with them, the money would run out in a week and they would die of hunger together. But if she took the money for herself alone, maybe she could flee to another city, find an old friend, or find another man to take advantage of. Slowly, very carefully so as not to make noise, Chantel slid her hand under Marcus's pillow. Her heart beat loudly. She felt the envelope with the money and pulled it gently. Marcus moved a little, and Chantel froze with fear, but he just changed position and continued snoring. Chantel managed to get the envelope out, put it quickly in her purse, and then, in silence, put her clothes in the black plastic bag. Without looking back toward the mother and brother she was betraying, Chantel slipped out of the room and disappeared into the darkness of the alley, taking with her the only hope of survival for her family. The next morning, Marcus's screams broke the silence of the neighborhood. He woke up and found his pillow empty. The money had disappeared. He looked around. Chantel and her things were not there either. Loretta woke up startled by the screams. When Marcus told her that Chantel had run away with all the money, at first she didn't believe it. She denied it, saying her beloved daughter couldn't be so cruel. But the facts were clear. The door wasn't forced, and there were no signs of a break-in. It was evident it had been an inside job. Loretta broke down crying inconsolably. This time her crying was genuinely heartbreaking. She shouted Chantel's name, the daughter she had always spoiled, and who was now abandoning her like trash to save herself. Marcus, on the verge of a nervous breakdown, became furious. He punched the damp wall until his knuckles bled. He cursed Chantel with the worst words. The pain of being betrayed by his own blood was much deeper than being expelled by his wife. At least Keisha had clear reasons to hate them, but Chantel was part of them, a parasite who was now eating another. Their ruin was complete when the owner of the boarding house pounded on the door, furious about the morning scandal. Seeing Marcus beside himself, the owner got scared and kicked them out right then and there. It turned out Marcus had only paid a small part of the rent the night before, and since Chantel had taken the rest, they were evicted again. This time, they had absolutely nothing. Zero. Loretta walked with difficulty with a lost gaze. The shock of her daughter's betrayal had destroyed her health. She was pale, covered in cold sweat. Marcus had to support his mother as they walked through the hot streets. In his despair, Marcus had a stupid idea: go back to the only place that had been his home. He thought maybe Keisha would have calmed down, that she would feel pity seeing his mother's state. With his last strength, Marcus took his mother walking miles back to the luxury-gated community where Keisha lived. They arrived at sunset. Their appearance was that of beggars. The security guard recognized them and looked at them with suspicion, but Marcus begged him just to see the house from afar. They stayed on the other side of the street. The house was dark and silent. Keisha's car was not in the garage. The garden was impeccable, but something made Marcus's knees buckle. A large sign was nailed to the fence, a yellow sign with huge red letters, "Sold, contact number X." Marcus's last hope vanished. Keisha had not only kicked them out, but was erasing every trace of them by selling the house. It was empty. Keisha had gone, taking her success and happiness, leaving Marcus and his mother completely alone in a cruel world. Marcus collapsed on the asphalt, hugging his mother's knees and crying in silence, in the shadow of the house he once despised. For Keisha, the days following the expulsion of Marcus and his family were days of healing silence. Gone were the screams asking for coffee in the morning. Gone were Loretta's soap operas at full volume. Gone were the complaints about food or clothes. The house became so quiet that Keisha could hear the ticking of the wall clock and the whisper of the wind in the garden trees. At first, that silence felt strange to her, but little by little, it became the blanket of peace she had longed for 5 years. The first thing she did was clean the house, literally and metaphorically. She hired professionals who disinfected every corner, threw away Marcus's remnants, and changed sheets, curtains, and carpets. She wanted to erase his smell, the smell of Marcus's tobacco and Loretta's penetrating perfume. Once clean, she contacted a real estate agent. She decided to sell it, even though she had paid for it with her sweat. There were too many bad memories in its walls. She needed a completely new start. The sale was quick. In 2 weeks, the house sold for a good price. With that money and her savings, now intact, Keisha bought a luxury penthouse in the city center. It was smaller, but much more modern, with strict security. From her window on the 30th floor, she could see the city lights, a symbol of her bright future. Her career also took off. Without the family drama that exhausted her, she could focus 100% on her work. The big audit project she led was a resounding success. Her bosses promoted her to senior partner, which brought with it a company car, a personal assistant, and a much higher salary. Keisha changed her style. The simple dresses she used for fear Marcus would get angry if she bought new clothes, she donated. Now she filled her closet with elegant designer suits. Her face, previously tired, now shone. Her friends said she looked 10 years younger. For Keisha, the divorce wasn't a failure, but an operation to remove a malignant tumor that was saving her life. The divorce in court was a quick formality. Marcus never showed up for the summons, so the judge ruled in Keisha's favor in his absence. When the judge gave the final gavel strike, Keisha didn't cry. She smiled, relieved, thanking God. She left the courthouse feeling light, as if chains had been removed from her feet. That night, in her new apartment, while enjoying a tea and a good book, she received a text from an unknown number. Normally, she would ignore it, but something told her to open it. "Keisha, it's Marcus. I'm writing from a stranger's phone. Please help me. My mother is very sick. We are sleeping on the street. Chantel ran off with our money. I feel like I'm going to die. I swear I'll change. Let us come back. Is there any love left for me in your heart?" Keisha read the message without expression. She felt no pity or desire to help, only disgust at seeing her peace interrupted. She remembered how Marcus left her alone with a high fever to go fishing. She remembered how Loretta threw her food in the trash for being a little bland. She remembered the last slap. Love? That love had been murdered by them over and over again. Without replying, with a firm finger, Keisha blocked the number and deleted the message. She approached the window and looked at the city. She imagined that in some dark corner, Marcus would be crying over his fate, but that was no longer her problem. Everyone is responsible for their own decisions. Marcus chose to be a lazy abuser when he had everything, and now he had to assume the consequences of being a loser when he had lost everything. Keisha took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh air of freedom. She felt complete, strong. She realized she didn't need a man to be happy. Happiness was inside her. That night she slept deeply, without nightmares. She knew that tomorrow would be brighter, a path clean of parasites, a path toward true happiness that she herself had created. She had turned pain into strength, and her best revenge was to be so successful and happy that the existence of her traitors had become completely irrelevant. 1 year later, a luxurious event hall in the city center was splendidly decorated. Today was the grand opening of Keisha's 5th boutique and the launch of the charitable foundation she had created to help women victims of domestic violence. Keisha, radiant, cut the inaugural ribbon with a genuine smile. She wore a dress designed by herself, elegant and sophisticated. She was no longer the oppressed woman, but a symbol of resilience and success. After the ceremony, a social act began, the delivery of 1,000 food packages and financial aid to people in need. Keisha insisted on distributing them personally. A long line of people waited patiently. Keisha gave each one their package and an envelope with a kind smile until it was the turn of a skeletal man pushing an old wheelchair. The man wore torn and dirty clothes. A penetrating smell emanated from him. In the wheelchair sat an old woman in an even more pitiful state, with a lost gaze. Keisha offered him the food package and the envelope. "Here, sir. May it be a blessing for you and your mother." The man didn't take the package immediately. His trembling hand stopped. He lowered his gaze, fixing on Keisha's high heels. Then slowly, he raised his face. His sunken eyes met hers. Time seemed to stop. Keisha? His voice was barely a whisper. Keisha looked at him closely. Despite the dirt and suffering, she recognized that man. It was Marcus. And the old woman in the wheelchair was Loretta. Her ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law were before her as beggars, waiting for her charity. Keisha's heart beat normally. She felt no anger, nor resentment, not even pity. Only an emptiness, a total indifference. They were like strangers. Marcus waited for a reaction, screams, crying, something. He wanted to kneel, ask for forgiveness, tell her how sorry he was, but Keisha did none of that. She nodded politely, her professional smile intact, put the package and the envelope in Marcus's trembling hand, and turned to the next person in line. "Please move forward, sir. The line is long." Marcus's heart shattered. Keisha's indifference was the most painful punishment. Being invisible, being irrelevant. A security member approached and asked him kindly to move. Marcus, stunned, pushed his mother's wheelchair. She only cared about reaching the food. He stopped on the sidewalk across the street. He saw Keisha get into a luxury black sedan. A chauffeur opened the door for her. The car drove away, taking her toward her brilliant life. Without looking back, Marcus opened the food package. Inside was a warm meal of roasted chicken and vegetables, the most luxurious food he had seen in a year. He gave a spoonful to his mother and then ate himself. The taste was delicious, but in his mouth it mixed with the salty taste of the tears running down his cheeks. He cried inconsolably in the middle of the street, hugging the food box as if it were his only connection to the past. Regret arrived too late. He had thrown away a diamond for a handful of sharp stones, and now those stones had bled him dry. The door to forgiveness was closed, not with a key, but because the owner of the house had moved to a much more beautiful palace. The perfect revenge is not anger, but becoming so happy, so successful, and so peaceful that the existence of those who hurt you no longer matters in the slightest. Their ruin was just a small footnote in the thick book of her success. If you liked my story and want to hear more, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. If you'd like to support me, you can do it through Super Thanks. It would mean a lot. In the comments, tell me which city you're watching from and what time it is so I can see how far my story reaches. I've added 2 more life stories on the screen just for you. Click one now and let's keep spending time together. Much love. See you soon.